Hi, this is Donald here, and this is my review of Poet's Choice by Edward Hirsch. Poet's Choice is a collection of poetry ranging from both ancient to romantic to modern day, compiled by the author, who himself is actually a poet, and more so than just a poet, he's actually a critic as well, I believe. This is a pretty hefty book, though it may not look like it. It's about 432 pages long, including an index with a bunch of different authors and poem names. In total, the author, Edward Hirsch, goes through about 130 different poets and different types and genres of poetry. This poetry actually reflects the author's taste, first and foremost. Although it's a collection of poetry, it's really a collection that's meaningful to this author. That being said, a lot of the issues involved are things that are personal and resonate with him, even though he doesn't really get too much into his personal life. And he does a good job of keeping his own politics and social views out of it, though it's not really hard to guess, where he stands on some of these issues. With each chapter of the book, the author explains a little bit of the background of the poetry or the poet, as well as his thoughts and critiques on it, as well as his own feelings as well. And overall, this was actually pretty insightful because I got to learn a lot of different poets that I've considered reading but I've never gotten into. And this is a great book for really getting a large-scale view of poetry in general. There are so many poets and poems in this book that you're bound to find something that you like. And it's pretty easy from there on to actually go look up the poet. And, the author in this book lists a lot of the poetry books and the years they're active and specific poems that are famous. So that's very helpful. The book itself, I bought a hardcover edition, is really nice. And I love the cover, I love the size, I love the hardcover. The paper is not cheap. It's a nice glossier paper. It's really nice to read. Just like a poetry book should be, You want to enjoy holding it in your hand and just being there with it. If I had one critique, it would be I had wished there was a little bit more poetry and that some of the critiques were a little bit less academic, I suppose, because sometimes it's a little hard to follow. And although he gives a lot of good background on the poets and what he thinks their strengths and weaknesses are, it would have been nice to have a couple more poems in each chapter as well. That being said, the book already is quite long, and there's a lot of good poetry already in there. Just for a reference, I would say this book is about half poetry and half analysis or just comments and thoughts by the author, Edward Hirsch. It's a pretty good balance overall, I'd say. Regarding the types of poems he talks about, Edward Hirsch, although he includes some ancient and romantic poets and going on from there, most of the book I'd say is poetry from the 1900s. And a lot of poetry in here is from the later 1900s as well. So you have a lot of Vietnam War era, 70s, 80s, 90s poetry as well. So there is a pretty good fresh take on poetry. Would I recommend this book? I would absolutely recommend this book to anyone who likes poetry or wants to get a taste of poetry. Poetry can be pretty intimidating to get into. Depending on you don't know who to start with. If you pick the wrong person, it might be too hard and you might not really resonate. And this is a really good compromise where you get something that's a lot more digestible. I will say I don't recommend, you do what you want, but personally, I think this is the kind of book that you don't have to sit down and read in one sitting or just stay on this book until it's done. This book reads perfectly fine, just reading it a little there, a little here, putting the book down for a couple months if you want, and getting right back into it. I don't think you need to grind through it. At the end of this book, it was sad to put it down and acknowledge its end. I was eager to finish the book when I was reading it about halfway through, for sure. 'Cause, it's a long book and I was reading through it and it's quite a bit to digest. But it was really a journey with the author. And just poetry in general, it was an adventure and a journey. There's a lot of emotions in there as well. And the author is pretty personal. Maybe not with specific events in his life or anything like that, but I feel like we connected, the author and myself, and the poetry in like a very human way, which is after all what poetry is. Thanks, and that concludes my review of Poet's Choice by Edward Hirsch. Got nothing but good things to say. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And thanks. Have a good one.